For many centuries, people across Greece told stories about gods, heroes, and the creation of the world. These tales did not come from one sacred text. Instead, they developed through oral tradition, local customs, and epic poetry. Poets like Homer helped preserve them, turning earlier songs and legends into widely shared narratives. Over time, these myths became a key part of ancient Greek life, influencing art, theatre, and religion. In the late 1800s, archaeologists made discoveries that hinted some myths might reflect real places. Heinrich Schliemann uncovered ruins at Hisarlik, likely the site of Troy, supporting the idea that the Trojan War stories had a historical basis. Arthur Evans later explored Knossos on Crete, which featured large, maze-like structures that may have inspired the legend of the Minotaur. Such findings showed how myths could blend real events, local traditions, and imaginative details. Even though these stories arose in a distant past, they continue to attract attention today. They tackle themes of power, loyalty, and the limits of human ambition, often involving dramatic struggles between mortals and gods. Many also serve as cautionary tales, warning against unchecked pride or dishonoring the divine. By looking at Greek myths, we can glimpse how people long ago explained natural forces, moral questions, and social rules. It took us over a month to research and produce this entire documentary. If you find it valuable, please consider subscribing to our channel, leaving a comment, and giving this video a like. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Out of Chaos. Greek myth begins in a vast, unshaped void called chaos, a term often translated as yawning chasm or endless space. Early poets, most notably Hesiod, pictured chaos as a primordial presence that existed before anything else took form. From this silent gulf, a group of elemental forces emerged, each representing a core aspect of reality. Gaia arose as the living earth, solid and fertile. Tartaros manifested as a deep, shadowy pit beneath the surface, while Eros, sometimes depicted as the force of attraction, kindled the spark of procreation. Joining them were Nyx, night, and Erebos, darkness, concepts that underscored how the cosmos held both generative and menacing possibilities. Gaia's role was pivotal, as she embodied physical creation itself. In a spontaneous act, she birthed Uranos, sky, the mountains and the seas, shaping the planet's early contours. The union of earth and sky produced a first generation of divine children, including the Titans. But this primeval family quickly became embroiled in conflict. Uranos, for reasons ranging from fear to disgust, suppressed some of his offspring, most notoriously the monstrous Cyclopes and Hecatonchires, forcing them back into Gaia's depths. Distressed by this endless confinement, Gaia plotted an act of rebellion. She fashioned a sickle of unbreakable adamant and persuaded her children to rise against their tyrannical father. Only the youngest Titan, Kronos, dared to strike. In an ambush that would define an entire cosmic cycle, Kronos attacked Uranos, wounding him so severely that he could no longer hold his place directly over Gaia. This violent act permanently separated sky from earth, allowing room for weather, daylight, and life. Drops of the fallen sky god's blood then created new beings on earth, including the Erinyes, Furies, and the formidable giants, each one destined to shape mythic conflicts to come. Some accounts say Aphrodite also originated at this time, rising from the sea foam around Uranus's severed parts, thus binding a tale of violent upheaval to the birth of the goddess of love. From the very beginning, Greek cosmogony presented a universe in which creation and destruction moved hand in hand, establishing a pattern that would recur as new generations of gods fought for supremacy. When Kronos supplanted Uranos, he inherited dominion over the sky and the living earth. In some versions of the myth, This new reign was remembered as a golden age for mortals, an era of peace and prosperity. Yet Kronos himself had reason to fear. A prophecy stated he would be overthrown by one of his own children. To prevent that threat, he devoured each newborn from his union with his sister wife Rhea, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. In many ancient poems, Kronos' willingness to swallow his offspring is presented not just as cruelty, but also as a desperate bid to freeze the cosmic order in place. Rhea, determined to save at least one child, deceived Kronos by offering him a stone wrapped in cloth instead of the infant Zeus. She then concealed the true baby in a secret sanctuary, often said to be a cave in Crete, where nurturing spirits shielded him from his father's gaze. Once Zeus reached maturity, he embarked on a calculated plan to free his siblings. Depending on the version told, he obtained a potion from Gaia or the Oceanid Metis, then tricked Kronos into drinking it. The mixture forced Kronos to vomit up his grown children, who joined Zeus to mount an open challenge against their father's regime. This conflict became known as the Titanomachy, the legendary war between the Titans and the younger gods, often referred to as the Olympians, though they had not yet ascended Mount Olympus as their permanent seat. Zeus recruited formidable allies, the one-eyed Cyclopes, who forged his thunderbolt, and the Hecatonchires, whose 100 arms could hurl boulders with frightening speed. Titans such as Oceanus chose neutrality, or allied with Zeus, but most stood behind Kronos. Year after year, the war raged without a clear victor, until the combined might of Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, and their monstrous confederates began to break the Titans' defenses. Victory eventually fell to Zeus, who exiled most of the defeated Titans to Tartaros, placing the Hecatonchires as their wardens. Through this cosmic strife, Zeus established a new order. He, Poseidon, and Hades divided sovereignty over the world's main domains, sky, sea, and underworld, while the other liberated gods assumed significant roles. Cultural parallels have long been noted between this myth and stories from the Near East, such as the succession myths of the Hittites, lending credibility to the idea that Greek traditions were shaped by multiple cultural streams. Yet the Titanomachy remained distinctively Greek. Raw power might prevail for a time, but cunning and alliances would ultimately dictate who ruled. In many sources, victory over the Titans did not bring Zeus lasting peace. Gaia, distressed by the harsh imprisonment of her Titan offspring, birthed a new brood, the Giants. While the Titans had been quasi-regal in bearing, the Giants were more chaotic, often described as massive beings with serpentine legs and overwhelming strength. Stirred by Gaia's resentment, the Giants launched a direct assault on the Olympians. Art from the archaic and classical periods frequently portrayed this epic battle called the Gigantomachy. Gigantic figures, sometimes shown with dragon-like coils, hurled rocks and flaming trees, attempting to topple Olympus itself. An oracle revealed that the gods needed mortal help to overcome this threat, so Zeus enlisted the hero Heracles. With his bow, often said to be dipped in the Hydra's venom, Heracles helped the Olympians turn the tide. One by one, giants like Alcyoneus or Porphyrion fell, smitten by divine lightning or felled by Heracles' arrows, where the Titanomachy highlighted a dynastic struggle. The Gigantomachy emphasized Zeus's capacity to defend his established domain against raw elemental rage. Victory meant that, at last, the Olympian Pantheon reigned unchallenged. Philosophers of a later era sometimes viewed the Gigantomachy as an allegory, civilization, represented by the Olympians, defeating unbridled chaos, the giants. Whatever its deeper meaning, the myth reinforced the idea that Zeus, although supreme, might still face rebellion if cosmic forces rose again. The line between order and disorder remained fragile, upheld by vigilance and the occasional involvement of heroic mortals. Prometheus. Among the Titans, Prometheus emerged as a paradoxical figure. He had sided with Zeus in the Titanomachy, yet he soon became the chief challenger of Olympian authority, though not by raw violence. Instead, Prometheus displayed deep concern for humankind, a species the gods at times neglected or scorned. Ancient tradition credited him with shaping the first men from clay, or at least granting them the key survival skills needed to endure. One of Prometheus's best-known acts was the theft of fire, recounted in Hesiod's works and dramatized in plays such as Prometheus Bound. Because Zeus, aggrieved by earlier slights, had withheld fire from mortals, people were condemned to live without warmth, metalworking, or advanced cooking methods. Prometheus, pitying their plight, hid a burning ember in a fennel stalk and carried it secretly down to earth. This gift transformed human civilization, enabling technological growth and symbolic progress. Zeus retaliated by subjecting Prometheus to a gruesome, perpetual torment. Chains bound the defiant Titan to a remote crag, and each day an eagle devoured his liver, which regrew overnight to prolong the agony. Some accounts note that Prometheus also withheld knowledge of a prophecy threatening Zeus. He alone knew that a particular child of Zeus could one day replace him. Imprisoning Prometheus served not merely as vengeance, but also as a measure of control. Generations later, the hero Heracles would free Prometheus, shooting the eagle and breaking the chains, in a deed reflecting the hero's ability to transcend divine grudges. Over time, Prometheus became a broader symbol of clever resistance to authority, revered as a protector who suffered to equip humans with tools of progress. In philosophical discourse, he was sometimes cast as an emblem of human intellect, standing up to cosmic or tyrannical power. Yet his punishment also served as a warning. Even a titan who once aided Zeus could be destroyed for disobedience, emphasizing the complexities of godly favor and wrath in the Greek Pantheon. Pandora's box. Alongside the punishment of Prometheus, Zeus enacted another plan that would ensure mortal dependence on divine rule. He ordered the creation of Pandora, a being shaped by Hephaestus from earth and water, then gifted by all Olympians with traits such as beauty, skill, grace, and cunning. Her very name, all gifted, reflected the collaborative effort of the gods in fashioning this figure. While some variations say the gods devised her simply to be a companion to mortal men, Hesiod's account explicitly frames her as a snare set to afflict humanity with unforeseen troubles. Pandora arrived with a sealed jar, often transformed into a box in later retellings. She was told never to open it, but curiosity or divine persuasion led her to lift the lid. Out swarmed countless evils, disease, sorrow, toil, and the myriad misfortunes that would haunt humanity from that point on. Pandora hastily shut the container, leaving Hope, Elpis, trapped inside. The moral and symbolic messages behind this detail are many. Some read it as proof that amid suffering, mortals retain the capacity for optimism. Others argue it suggests hope itself can be as dangerous as any curse if it remains hidden. Greek sources debated the fairness of Pandora's role. Some praised her gifts and saw in her a reflection of divine artistry, whereas others treated her as the root of earthly suffering, echoing cross-cultural themes in which a woman's action ushers in a fallen human condition. Regardless, the myth had an immediate link to Prometheus's story. Zeus, enraged by the Titan's theft of fire, sought to ensure humans would remain vulnerable in other ways. Pandora symbolized the fragility of mortal fortunes, forever reliant on divine will and prone to misfortune no matter how clever they became. The Great Flood, driven yet again by discontent with mortal behavior, Zeus unleashed a cataclysmic flood to erase a corrupt generation. This event, often compared to similar deluge myths in Mesopotamian or biblical traditions, told of how only two humans survived: Deucalion, a son of Prometheus, and his wife Pyrrha, a daughter of Epimetheus and Pandora. Warned by either Prometheus or an oracle, the couple constructed a large chest or boat and filled it with provisions. When Zeus caused torrential rains to fall, all other mortals perished, save for those in the chest. After 9 days adrift, Deucalion and Pyrrha landed on a high mountain. Various local versions name Parnassus, Othris, or Athos. Facing a deserted world, they begged the gods for guidance. The Oracle of Themis advised them to toss the bones of their mother behind them. which Deucalion shrewdly interpreted as stones from Gaia, Earth. Each stone that Deucalion threw turned into a man, and each one Pyrrha tossed became a woman, thus re-peopling the earth with a new, humbler race. Having witnessed Zeus's power firsthand, these survivors and their descendants held a deeper respect for divine authority. In symbolic terms, the flood narrative reiterated an ongoing pattern in Greek mythology: the gods' capacity for cataclysmic punishment when human impiety grew too strong. It also demonstrated the value of mortal cunning, devotion, and lineage. Deucalion's direct tie to Prometheus implied that those who carried the Titan's spark of intelligence could endure even divine wrath. His child with Pyrrha, often named Helen, was said to be the eponymous ancestor of the Hellenes, Greeks, hinting at how mythic genealogies wove divine and human together. By the end of these events, the framework of Greek myth had taken shape. The cosmos, once locked in violent strife, found a new order under Zeus. Challenges like the Titanomachy and Gigantomachy demonstrated how cosmic power shifted across generations, while Prometheus, Pandora, and the flood stories explained humanity's precarious but hopeful state. United by these ancient tales, the Greeks saw their world as governed by gods neither fully benevolent nor purely malicious, and mortals as ever resourceful, navigating divine tests with a mixture of fear, faith, and ingenuity. Through such foundational myths, the stage was set for the rise of the Olympian Pantheon and the legendary feats of the heroes who bridged the realms of man and deity. Chapter 2: The Olympian Pantheon. In ancient Greek belief, the world was guided by a group of powerful deities who lived on Mount Olympus. These gods did not stay remote. They often walked among humans and interfered in mortal affairs. While the number of important gods can vary by region and era, most Greeks recognized 12 major Olympians, each with special domains like war, wisdom, sea, or love. They also respected older powers such as the Titans. But the Olympians became the core pantheon after Zeus overcame his father, Kronos. Stories about the gods took shape through local traditions, temples, and festivals. Many myths show these deities punishing those who challenge them or fail to offer proper respect. At the same time, people turned to the gods for help. They built shrines, performed animal sacrifices, and dedicated gifts in hopes of winning favor. Poets gave the gods distinct personalities. As a result, Zeus and his siblings often behaved in ways that reflected human emotions: jealousy, pride, compassion, despite their great power. This dynamic character set made them central figures in Greek literature and drama, from early epic poetry to later tragic plays. Zeus. Zeus was regarded as the ruler of sky and thunder. Armed with a thunderbolt, he kept order among gods and humans alike. After the war against the Titans, Zeus took command of the universe, dividing power with his brothers Poseidon and Hades. Temples for Zeus stood across the Greek world, including the famous sanctuary at Olympia, where the Olympic Games were held in his honor. Myths often mention his desire for mortal women, which created many demigods and heroes. One well-known story involves the Phoenician princess Europa. Zeus saw Europa gathering flowers near the shoreline. To approach her without fear, he turned into a gentle white bull. At first, Europa touched his snowy hide and eventually climbed onto his back. The bull, moving swiftly into the sea, carried her across the water to Crete. There, Zeus revealed his true form. Europa became a figure of local worship, and her sons included Minos, the future king of Crete. Later, Greek and Roman writers claimed her name influenced the term Europe, hinting at a symbolic link between her myth and the continent's identity. Hera. Hera was Zeus's wife and queen of the gods, associated with marriage, childbirth, and the protection of women. Despite her status, She suffered from Zeus's infidelities. Many myths portray her as punishing Zeus's lovers or their offspring, sometimes in harsh ways. Yet she also supported heroes she deemed worthy, and remained a major deity with temples like the Heraion near Argos. Io. One example of Hera's anger involves Io, a priestess of Hera. Zeus fell in love with Io and changed her into a white heifer to hide the affair. Hera, not fooled by his trick, demanded the heifer as a gift. She set a watchful, many-eyed guardian named Argus to keep Io captive. Zeus sent Hermes to kill Argus, after which Hera tormented Io further by sending a gadfly to sting her endlessly. Io wandered across lands and seas, an ordeal tied to place names like the Bosphorus, Oxford. Finally, Zeus intervened, freeing Io from her bovine form. Some myths say she became an ancestor of heroic lines in Egypt, or even a figure in the founding genealogies of certain Greek families. Leto. Although Leto was not directly a lover of Hera, she faced Hera's hostility because she carried Zeus's children, Apollo and Artemis. When Leto was pregnant, Hera prevented her from finding a place to give birth. Floating islands and towns shut their doors to Leto out of fear of Hera's wrath. At last, the island Delos, often portrayed as barren and floating, gave her refuge. There, Leto delivered the twins who grew into major Olympian gods. Later, Hera's opposition surfaced again if she saw Leto or her children receive high honours. Niobe. The story of Niobe shows another angle of Hera's domain over marriage and motherhood, though the direct conflict arises with Leto's children. Niobe, a queen of Thebes, boasted she was superior to Leto because Niobe had 14 children, 7 sons and 7 daughters, while Leto had only 2. Angered by her boast, Apollo and Artemis killed Niobe's children with arrows. Devastated, Niobe wept until she turned into stone. Ancient Greeks saw this as a warning that excessive pride or disrespect toward divinity always ended in tragedy. Some texts place Hera in the background, either endorsing Niobe's pride or watching the punishment as part of cosmic order. Apollo. Apollo was the son of Zeus and Leto, twin brother of Artemis. Many Greeks considered him a god of music, archery, healing, and prophecy. He carried a lyre, played in choral gatherings, and shot arrows of plague or sudden death if mortals offended him. His festivals sometimes emphasized his purity and role as a patron of the arts. Apollo's grace and beauty made him stand out among the Olympians, yet his myths also display a stern side. The Oracle of Delphi. One of Apollo's most important roles was as the god of prophecy. After his birth, he travelled to Delphi, where he slew the dragoness Python and claimed the sacred site. The Oracle at Delphi became known across the Mediterranean. People asked the priestess, known as the Pythia, to deliver Apollo's messages. She gave cryptic answers that rulers and commoners alike tried to interpret. The Delphic oracle guided decisions on war, colonization, and even moral dilemmas. The Temple of Apollo at Delphi gained reputation and wealth, collecting offerings from city-states, hoping for favourable prophecies. Over centuries, Delphi evolved into a political centre, linking Apollo's divine insight with practical alliances. Daphne. A different side of Apollo's myth appears in the story of Daphne. Struck by Eros's golden arrow, Apollo became infatuated with the nymph Daphne, yet Eros had shot Daphne with a lead arrow that made her reject love. Fleeing Apollo's advances, she prayed to her father, the river god Peneus, for escape. He transformed her into a laurel tree. Heartbroken, Apollo honoured her by adopting the laurel as his sacred plant. Wreaths of laurel later crowned poets and winners at the Pythian Games. This myth illustrated the concept that even a god's desire could end in sorrow if the other party resisted his power. Asclepius. Asclepius was Apollo's son with the mortal Coronis, or in some versions, a nymph. Raised by the centaur Chiron, Asclepius learned healing arts and became a renowned physician, able even to resurrect the dead. Alarmed that humans might escape mortality, Zeus struck Asclepius with a thunderbolt. However, Asclepius evolved into a god of medicine after death, worshipped in sanctuaries where the sick came for cures and dream visions. The cult sites known as Asclepiae spread across Greece, featuring sleeping chambers, baths, and sometimes theatres. This practice showed how Greeks turned certain mythical healers into active divine patrons, bridging mortal skill and godly favour. Artemis. Artemis was Apollo's twin sister, born on Delos after Leto's long search for a safe place. She became goddess of the hunt, wilderness, and moon. Many myths present her as a virgin huntress armed with a bow, roaming forests with nymph companions. Mortal hunters who spied on her bathing or insulted her were severely punished. Ancient city-states often linked her to rites of passage for young women, especially in places like Broron, where girls served as little bears in her honour. Artemis guarded childbirth as well, reflecting a dual power of both bringing life and taking it. Though associated with purity, she could be fierce. Legends abound of hunts, transformations, and retribution against those who ignored nature's boundaries. Poseidon. Poseidon was Zeus's brother and lord of the seas. Worshipped by anyone who relied on sea travel or fishing, his temperament was said to mirror the ocean, calm at times, yet prone to storms and earthquakes. Sailors prayed to him for safe voyages, and city-states competing for naval supremacy sought his favour. Poseidon was also credited with creating springs or shaping coastlines by striking the earth with his trident. In some local myths, he contested Athena for patronage of Athens. He offered a saltwater spring to the Athenians, while Athena brought them an olive tree. They chose the olive as more useful, so the city was named for Athena. This story showed how gods vied for mortal devotion, and how a city's identity was tied to a preferred deity. Athena. Born directly from Zeus's head, fully armed, Athena became goddess of wisdom, strategy, and crafts. Myths describe her as calm, logical, and a protector of heroes. She guided figures like Odysseus and Heracles, using clever tactics rather than raw force. In Athens, she received special devotion. The Parthenon on the Acropolis was her grand temple, built to symbolize the city's wealth and artistic achievements. Athena's role extended to weaving, metalwork, and other crafts, reflecting skill and careful thought. Arachne. The Arachne myth warns against challenging a god, even in friendly competition. Arachne was a gifted weaver who believed her art rivaled Athena's. Offended by this claim, Athena appeared in disguise to give Arachne a chance to repent. Arachne refused and wove a tapestry mocking the gods. Angered by the flawless but insulting work, Athena either tore the tapestry or struck Arachne, who hanged herself in despair. Taking pity or still furious, Athena transformed Arachne into a spider, condemning her to weave forever. This cautionary tale again illustrated how mortal skill must never deny the divine its due respect. Yet it also showed Athena's link to weaving and crafts, a civilizing force in Greek life. Aphrodite. Aphrodite was the goddess of love, beauty, and desire, honoured across Greece and Cyprus. Her origin story differed by region. Some said she was born from sea foam after Uranos' fall. Others described her as a child of Zeus and Dione. She could stir passion in gods and mortals alike, often causing conflicts or unexpected unions. Despite this power, myths sometimes reveal her own vulnerabilities. The Trojan War, for example, began partly because Paris chose Aphrodite over Hera and Athena, leading to jealousy and hostilities. Narcissus. Though he was a mortal youth, the tale of Narcissus relates closely to Aphrodite's realm of attraction. According to one version, Narcissus scorned many admirers. The nymph Echo, cursed by Hera only to repeat others' words, became infatuated with him. When Narcissus rejected her, the goddess of love, or Nemesis in some accounts, caused him to fall in love with his own reflection in a pool. Unable to turn away, Narcissus wasted away, leaving behind only a flower bearing his name. This myth highlighted the dangers of self-obsession and the misuse of beauty. Pygmalion's statue. Another story linked to Aphrodite's influence focuses on Pygmalion, a sculptor in Cyprus who disliked the behaviour of local women. He carved a statue representing his ideal vision of female beauty. Over time, he became so enchanted with his creation that he prayed to Aphrodite for a bride like the statue. Moved by his sincerity, the goddess brought the ivory figure to life. This new woman, often called Galatea in later tradition, became Pygmalion's wife. The myth underlined Aphrodite's power to grant extraordinary wishes in matters of love, and the artist's role in imagining perfection. Eros and Psyche. Eros, sometimes called Cupid, was Aphrodite's son and personification of love's power. The tale of Eros and Psyche is one of the most detailed love stories in Greek tradition. Psyche, a mortal woman of great beauty, drew admiration that rivaled Aphrodite's. Jealous, Aphrodite ordered Eros to make Psyche fall for a vile man. But when Eros saw Psyche, he accidentally pricked himself with his own arrow and fell in love. He took Psyche to a hidden palace, visiting only at night and insisting she never look at his face. Curious, she disobeyed and lit a lamp, discovering Eros's divine form. Startled, she spilled oil on him and he fled. Desperate to win him back, Psyche wandered through trials set by Aphrodite, sorting immense piles of seeds, retrieving water from a dangerous source, and even venturing into the underworld. With help from sympathetic creatures and unseen forces, she completed each task. At the end of her hardships, Eros and Psyche were reunited, and Psyche became immortal. Their union symbolized the soul's psyche, ongoing quest for love and fulfillment, and how determination could win favor from even a hostile deity. Later, writers saw it as a parable of personal growth through adversity. Hermes. Hermes served as messenger of the gods, traveling swiftly between Olympus and the mortal world. In Greek art, he is often shown with winged sandals and a winged cap. Myths connect him to commerce, thieves, and the guide of souls to the underworld. Hermes was clever from birth, stealing Apollo's cattle on the very day he was born. Yet he charmed Apollo by inventing the lyre, leading to a lasting exchange of gifts. Hermes kept the cattle, while Apollo received the new musical instrument. Hermes also protected travelers, granting safe passage on roads and punishing those who broke the rules of hospitality. Temples and boundary stones called Hermes, typically carved with Hermes' head, were common across the Greek countryside. Pan was another deity linked to Hermes. Some traditions say he was Hermes' son with a nymph. As a rustic god of shepherds and flocks, Pan roamed hills and woods, playing pipes, the pan flute, and stirring emotions that could range from joy to sudden irrational fear, hence the term panic. In some myths, he pursued nymphs with little success, echoing the pattern of unrequited love seen elsewhere in the Olympian cycle. People in Arcadia, a mountainous region of Greece, gave Pan special worship, believing that his playful or eerie presence affected both wildlife and the moods of hunters. His half-goat form signalled a closeness to nature, which made him a bridge between wilder spiritual forces and the more orderly Olympian gods. Dionysus was the god of wine, ecstasy, and theatre. He stood apart from most Olympians by having a mortal mother, Semele, and a father, Zeus. When Semele died, Zeus rescued the unborn baby and sewed him into his thigh until birth. This unusual origin gave Dionysus a dual identity, partly mortal, partly divine. As he travelled through distant lands, he spread the art of viticulture and the mysteries of wine, accompanied by satyrs and maenads who embraced his ecstatic rituals. People honoured him with festivals, leading to the development of Greek drama. Plays performed during the city Dionysia in Athens included both comedies and tragedies, reflecting the god's power to bring joy or madness. King Midas. Among Dionysus's many stories is the tale of King Midas. When Midas treated Dionysus's friend Silenus with kindness, Dionysus offered a reward. Midas wished for everything he touched to turn into gold. At first, this power delighted him. However, he soon realized its curse. Food and drink became gold before he could consume them. Desperate, Midas begged Dionysus to remove the golden touch. The god advised him to bathe in the river Pactolus, washing away the gift. Afterward, Midas learned humility. This myth reminded Greeks that short-sighted desires could bring ruin, and that divine gifts might carry hidden consequences. Demeter. Demeter was the goddess of grain and harvest, a vital figure for agrarian communities in Greece. Rituals and festivals in her honor were common, especially around sowing and reaping seasons. Farmers prayed to her for plentiful crops, and state ceremonies like the Eleusinian Mysteries sought her favor. Ancient myths often highlight Demeter's close connection to her daughter Persephone and show how their bond shaped the seasons. Temples to Demeter served as gathering places for both religious rites and agricultural planning. Persephone. Persephone was Demeter's daughter with Zeus. One day, as she was gathering flowers, the earth opened and Hades, lord of the underworld, seized her. According to most versions, Zeus had secretly approved the abduction. Grief-stricken, Demeter scoured the earth, refusing to let crops grow until her daughter was returned. Eventually, Zeus intervened, forcing Hades to release Persephone. However, Persephone had eaten pomegranate seeds in the underworld. Because of that act, she had to spend part of each year with Hades below, and the rest on earth with her mother. The Greeks believed that when Persephone was with Hades, plants died or went dormant, autumn and winter. When she returned to Demeter, the fields bloomed again, spring and summer. This cyclical pattern reflected the agricultural cycle and the deep link between life, death, and rebirth. Hades. Hades ruled the underworld, the dark realm where most souls went after death. Unlike the other Olympians, he rarely appeared on Mount Olympus. Greeks viewed him with both dread and respect, often avoiding his name and calling him Pluton, giver of wealth, instead. Though sometimes portrayed as stern, Hades was not evil. He enforced the natural boundary between the living and the dead. The living were not meant to linger in his domain, and he allowed few souls to leave once they arrived. Because of this strict separation, heroes who journeyed to the underworld, like Odysseus or Theseus, did so at great risk. The three places of souls. Greek myths spoke of different fates for the dead. Most souls drifted to the Asphodel Meadows, a shadowy plain where ordinary people wandered without major reward or punishment. The Isles of the Blessed, sometimes linked to Elysium or the Elysian Fields, were for those favored by the gods or for heroic spirits. Here, existence felt peaceful and free from the gloom found elsewhere below. The worst offenders, who insulted the gods, were cast into Tartarus, a place of torment far beneath Hades' throne. These divisions reflected Greek ideas of justice, memory, and the special status granted to those who pleased or angered the gods. Sisyphus. One of the most famous examples of punishment in the underworld is Sisyphus, a cunning king who cheated death multiple times. He tricked Thanatos, death, and escaped his own demise, prompting Zeus to intervene. When Sisyphus finally reached the underworld for good, the gods devised a personal torment. He had to roll a massive boulder up a steep hill, only for it to slip from his grasp near the top and roll back down. This endless task showed the futility of fighting divine order. Later, thinkers, such as the philosopher Albert Camus, drew on the image of Sisyphus to discuss human perseverance and the search for meaning. Places of the underworld. Greek poets often mention the 5 rivers flowing through the underworld. The most well-known is the Styx, a boundary river marking the point of no return. Gods swore unbreakable oaths by its waters, and any deity who violated such a promise faced dire consequences. The other rivers, Acheron, Woe, Cocytus, Lament, Phlegethon, Fire, and Lethe, Forgetfulness, each added to the atmosphere of eternal shadow. Newly arrived souls typically drank from Lethe to forget their earthly lives. Ferried by Charon across the Styx or Acheron, they found themselves subject to the underworld's unchanging routines. Cerberus, a monstrous 3-headed dog, guarded the entrance to prevent souls from escaping. Orpheus. The tragic story of Orpheus intersects with Hades' realm. Orpheus was a gifted musician whose songs could move both humans and beasts. When his wife Eurydice died from a snake bite, Orpheus travelled down to the underworld to plead for her return. Hades and Persephone were so captivated by his music that they granted Orpheus's request under one condition. As he led Eurydice back to the surface, he must not look behind him until they reached the world of light. Overcome by doubt at the final moment, Orpheus glanced back to see if she was following, and Eurydice vanished. The tale symbolized human struggle with the irreversible nature of death, and it emphasized how even great talent or favor could fail in the face of mortal frailty. Orpheus later wandered in grief, and various accounts say he was torn apart by Maenads or died alone, but his lyre playing endured as a sign of music's power to bridge worlds. Chapter 3: The Age of Heroes. Among the earliest dynasties in Greek mythical tradition is the House of Cadmus, linked to the founding of Thebes in Boeotia. According to legend, Cadmus was a Phoenician prince and the brother of Europa, the maiden abducted by Zeus. When searching for his lost sister, Cadmus consulted the Oracle of Delphi, which told him to abandon his quest and follow a special cow. Where it lay down, he should build a city. The cow led him to a region later known as Boeotia. There, he decided to sacrifice the animal to Athena, but needed water from a nearby spring. That spring, however, was guarded by a fierce serpent, sometimes described as sacred to Ares. Cadmus managed to slay the serpent, then sowed its teeth into the ground at Athena's suggestion. Armed warriors sprang up from the soil. By hurling a stone among them, Cadmus tricked them into fighting each other until only 5 survived. These 5 men, called the Spartoi, sown men, helped him build the core of Thebes. In time, Cadmus married Harmonia, a daughter of Ares and Aphrodite. Their wedding was a grand event attended by Olympian gods, who gifted them items like a famous necklace said to bring both prosperity and doom to its owners. Though Cadmus introduced writing, some say from Phoenicia, and established Thebes, he and his descendants were marked by misfortune. Many tales emphasize how their line faced curses or tragic fates, a pattern that would continue through generations. After Cadmus and Harmonia left Thebes, the city passed through various rulers. Eventually, the family line led to King Laius, who was Oedipus's father. This link between the city's mythical founder and Oedipus shaped the saga known as the Theban cycle, recounted by poets, dramatists, and mythographers over centuries. Oedipus. Oedipus is one of the most studied figures in Greek mythology, largely due to the dramatic story of how he unwittingly fulfilled a terrible prophecy. His father, King Laius, was warned by an oracle that if he had a son, this child would grow up to kill him. When Laius's wife, Jocasta, gave birth to Oedipus, Laius pierced the infant's ankles to prevent him from crawling away and ordered a servant to abandon him on a mountainside. The servant, moved by pity, passed the infant on to a shepherd from Corinth, where King Polybus and Queen Merope adopted the baby. Unaware of his true origin, Oedipus grew up believing them to be his real parents. As a young man, Oedipus faced rumors about not being the true son of Polybus. Concerned, he traveled to Delphi for answers. The oracle did not clarify his parentage, but declared he would murder his father and marry his mother. Horrified, Oedipus resolved never to return to Corinth, thinking that would protect Polybus and Merope. On the road, he encountered Laius travelling by chariot. Tensions erupted. Some say there was a dispute over who had the right of way, and Oedipus, in anger, killed the older man and his attendants, not realizing Laius was his birth father. Continuing his journey, Oedipus reached Thebes, which was plagued by a monstrous sphinx outside the city walls. The sphinx posed a riddle to all travellers, devouring those who answered incorrectly. In a famous version, the riddle asked, "What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening?" Oedipus replied, "Man." explaining how a human crawls as an infant, walks upright as an adult, and uses a cane in old age. Stunned by the correct solution, the Sphinx destroyed itself, freeing Thebes from terror. The grateful citizens welcomed Oedipus as their new king, and he married the queen Jocasta, his own mother, though neither realized it at the time. Under Oedipus's rule, Thebes thrived for a while. Then, a plague struck the city. Consulting the oracle again, Oedipus learned the plague would not lift until Laius's killer was punished. As Oedipus investigated, he slowly uncovered the truth. The man he had killed on the road was Laius, and the queen he had wed was his own mother. The horrifying realization led Jocasta to take her own life, and Oedipus, in despair, blinded himself. Exiled, he wandered until he found refuge in Colonus, near Athens. There, myths say he died under mysterious circumstances, possibly guided by the gods, and became a source of protective power for the land that took him in. The story of Oedipus highlights themes of fate, moral responsibility, and the limits of human understanding. Dramatists like Sophocles explored these issues, depicting how even a well-meaning hero can be trapped by destiny. Later thinkers, including Sigmund Freud, found deep psychological resonance in the Oedipus tale, though the ancient Greeks themselves focused more on how it illustrated the unstoppable force of prophecy and divine law. Perseus. Another major hero of the Greek tradition is Perseus, renowned for slaying the Gorgon Medusa. He was born to Danae, the daughter of King Acrisius of Argos. An oracle warned Acrisius that his grandson would one day kill him. To prevent this, Acrisius locked Danae in an underground chamber or bronze tower so she could never become pregnant. However, Zeus visited her in the form of a golden shower, and she conceived Perseus. When Acrisius discovered the child, he placed both mother and infant in a wooden chest and cast them adrift at sea, hoping fate or the waves would doom them. Washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, mother and son were taken in by a fisherman named Dictys. Perseus grew up under his care, but soon caught the attention of Dictys's brother, Polydectes, the king. Polydectes desired Danae for himself. Feigning goodwill, he announced that he planned to marry another woman and demanded guests bring horses as wedding gifts. Perseus, who had none, boasted he could provide something even more impressive: the head of Medusa. Polydectes seized on this boast and insisted Perseus keep his promise, hoping the young hero would die in the attempt. Medusa was one of 3 Gorgon sisters, the only one who was mortal. Early Greek writings often depict her as a hideous creature with snakes for hair. Anyone who met her gaze turned to stone. Later sources sometimes describe her former beauty, and how she was cursed by Athena for profaning a temple. Either way, Medusa lived in a remote land beyond the normal bounds of the Greek world, serving as a terrifying obstacle few dared to face. To aid Perseus, the gods stepped in. Athena gave him a polished shield, advising him to use its reflection to avoid Medusa's direct gaze. Hermes provided a curved blade or sickle. From the nymphs, Perseus obtained winged sandals to fly, a magic bag called the kibisis to carry Medusa's head, and Hades' cap of invisibility in some accounts. Armed with these gifts, Perseus set out to find the Gorgon's lair. Reaching Medusa's cave, Perseus approached under cover of darkness, or using the helm of invisibility. As Medusa slept, he positioned the reflective shield near her face. Guided by her reflection, he swung Hermes' blade, decapitating Medusa in one swift stroke. From her severed neck sprang the winged horse Pegasus and the warrior Chrysaia, children of Poseidon who had lain dormant in Medusa's body, according to some versions. The other Gorgons woke and pursued Perseus, but he fled with the aid of the cap of invisibility or the winged sandals. Securing Medusa's head in the kibisis prevented its power from affecting him. This victory gave Perseus a legendary weapon. Medusa's head retained its power to petrify anyone who looked upon it. Later, Perseus used it to protect himself or punish evildoers. In many artworks, vases, sculptures and paintings, Medusa's head is a striking motif, often shown with wide eyes and snakes swirling around her face. The story highlights how cunning, divine support, and careful planning enable a mortal to conquer supernatural horrors. On his journey home, Perseus encountered the kingdom of Ethiopia in mythic geography, sometimes far from modern Ethiopia, ruled by King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia's boast that she was more beautiful than the sea nymphs Nereids had offended Poseidon, who sent a sea monster to ravage the coast. An oracle declared that only the sacrifice of the couple's daughter, Andromeda, could appease the monster. Perseus found Andromeda chained to a rock by the shore awaiting her doom. Captivated by her plight, he offered to save her if her parents would allow him to marry her. They agreed. Flying above the waves with his winged sandals, Perseus battled the monster. Some versions say he used Medusa's head to turn it to stone. Others depict a more direct fight. Either way, Andromeda was spared and became Perseus's wife. Later, Greek star lore placed Andromeda, Perseus, Cepheus and Cassiopeia among the constellations in the night sky, memorializing the rescue as a cosmic tableau. With Andromeda, Perseus continued on his journey, eventually returning to Sisyphus. Polydectes, who had pressured Danae in Perseus's absence, refused to believe Perseus had truly obtained Medusa's head. In one version, Perseus revealed the trophy, turning Polydectes and his men to stone. He then installed Dictys as the new ruler, ensuring his mother's safety. Afterward, Perseus yearned to make peace with Acrisius, who still ruled Argos, but the old prophecy hung over them both. Some stories state that Perseus travelled to Argos, prompting Acrisius to flee out of fear. In other versions, Acrisius stayed, but the two did not reconcile. Eventually they met during athletic games in Thessaly. Perseus, competing in discus throwing, hurled a discus that veered off course and struck Acrisius, killing him on the spot. Thus, the oracle's warning was fulfilled. Acrisius died at his grandson's hand, albeit by accident rather than intent. Grieved by this outcome, Perseus declined the throne of Argos, exchanging realms with another relative. He and Andromeda founded or ruled over new territories, depending on the local tradition. Their children became part of a heroic lineage that would connect with other famous lines, further weaving the tapestry of Greek mythic genealogies. Perseus's saga offers a pattern seen in many hero tales: a dangerous prophecy, a journey aided by gods, a monstrous foe, a rescue of a princess, and an eventual confrontation with fate that cannot be escaped. Across these narratives, the House of Cadmus and the legend of Perseus reflect core themes of Greek myth: curses that span generations, the power of prophecy, and the tension between mortal courage and divine decree. Whether facing monstrous serpents, gorgons, or the burden of oracles, these heroes shaped the landscape of Theban and Argive lore, paving the way for the more famous epic adventures that would follow in the Age of Heroes. The 12 Labours of Heracles. Heracles, widely recognized in Roman mythology as Hercules, was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Alcmene. From birth, he displayed immense strength. Yet his life was shaped by Hera's hostility. She resented Zeus's affair and targeted the boy with repeated attempts on his life. As an infant, Heracles reportedly strangled 2 serpents Hera placed in his cradle. In adulthood, he served as a model of courage, but also faced severe trials set in motion by Hera's malice. One of the most defining moments of Heracles' youth occurred when Hera drove him into a frenzy. In this madness, he killed his own wife Megara and their children. Overwhelmed by guilt, Heracles sought purification at the court of King Eurystheus in Mycenae. At the urging of the Delphic oracle, Eurystheus commanded Heracles to complete 10 tasks, later expanded to 12. Only by succeeding in these labours would Heracles atone for his crime and earn a measure of peace. Although the tasks began as punishment, they became legendary deeds that showcased his blend of raw strength and resourceful thinking. The first challenge was to slay a lion terrorising the region of Nemea. This beast's fur was impervious to ordinary weapons. Arrows and swords could not pierce its hide. Discovering this by trial and error, Heracles trapped the lion in its cave. After blocking one entrance, he cornered it and strangled it with his bare hands. He then skinned the carcass using the beast's own claws. From that day on, Heracles wore the lion's impenetrable hide as a cloak, which served as additional protection in future battles. The success of this labour established his reputation for both courage and practical tactics. Next, King Eurystheus sent Heracles to destroy the Hydra that lived in the marshes near Lerna. This creature had multiple heads, and each time one was cut off, 2 more would grow in its place. Furthermore, one of its heads was immortal and could not be killed by normal means. According to many accounts, Heracles enlisted the help of his nephew Iolaus, who used a torch or firebrand to cauterize each stump after Heracles struck off a head. This prevented the Hydra from regrowing them. Finally, Heracles severed the immortal head and buried it under a heavy rock. He dipped some of his arrows in the Hydra's venomous blood, giving them a deadly edge. Later, Eurystheus tried to invalidate this labour, claiming Heracles had received help from Iolaus. For the third labour, Heracles was tasked with capturing the Ceryneian hind, a swift, golden-horned deer sacred to Artemis. Rather than slaying this creature, he had to bring it back alive to Mycenae. Many say Heracles tracked the hind for a full year, pursuing it through various territories without harming it. At last, he managed to catch it near a river, or while it slept, Artemis appeared, angered at the capture of her sacred animal. Heracles explained that he was acting under orders and intended no disrespect to her. Reluctantly, Artemis allowed him to take the hind to Eurystheus, provided it was returned safely. Heracles honoured his word, handing over the deer just briefly before releasing it back to the wild. Eurystheus next demanded Heracles bring back the fearsome Erymanthian boar alive. This massive wild boar roamed Mount Erymanthos, destroying crops and frightening villagers. Heracles chased it into deep snow, tiring it until he could trap the beast. Binding it with chains, he hauled it back to Mycenae. The myth goes that Eurystheus, terrified at the sight of the living boar, hid in a large storage jar, Pythos, when Heracles returned. This story captured how Eurystheus, though commanding Heracles, was himself a fearful figure who cowered behind palace walls. Labour 5. The Augean Stables. The fifth labour required cleaning the filthy stables of King Augeas in a single day. Augeas owned vast herds of cattle, and the stables had not been cleaned for years. Rather than shovel manure by hand, Heracles devised a clever plan. He diverted 2 rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, through the stable yard, letting the rushing water wash out the years of accumulated waste. Although Augeas had promised Heracles a share of his cattle if he succeeded, the king later refused to honour the deal, arguing Heracles acted only under Eurystheus's orders. This dispute sometimes led to claims that Eurystheus disqualified the labour because Heracles had bargained for payment. In the sixth labour, Heracles was sent to a marsh near Lake Stymphalia to drive away a flock of dangerous birds. With beaks and feathers of bronze, these birds ravaged crops, attacked people, and bred in swamps where normal foot soldiers could not reach them. Athena gave Heracles a special rattle or set of bronze castanets fashioned by Hephaestus. The noise startled the birds into flight, allowing Heracles to shoot many with arrows or chase them off. This task was less about brute force and more about strategy, proving Heracles could adapt to unusual threats. Eurystheus then instructed Heracles to seize the Cretan bull, a fierce creature that had been terrorizing Crete. Some legends link this bull to Poseidon's anger at King Minos, who had failed to sacrifice it. Heracles wrestled the beast into submission but did not kill it. He brought it to Eurystheus, who released it near Marathon in Attica. The bull's rampage there set up another famed myth involving the hero Theseus, who would later capture or kill the creature. Heracles' role in this labour showed his growing reputation beyond the Peloponnese, reaching the island of Crete and affecting future hero stories. In this task, Heracles travelled to Thrace to deal with the man-eating mares of King Diomedes. These fearsome horses ate human flesh and were guarded by Diomedes' warriors. Accounts vary on how Heracles overcame them. In one version, he fed Diomedes himself to the mares, which calmed them enough for Heracles to control them. In others, he simply fought off the guards and tamed the mares with force. After subduing them, He took the horses to Eurystheus, who either let them roam free or dedicated them to Hera. The tale also highlighted Heracles' willingness to act harshly against cruel rulers, turning the same savagery back onto its source. For the 9th labour, Eurystheus demanded the belt, or girdle, of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. This belt signified her authority and skill. Initially, Hippolyta welcomed Heracles, impressed by his fame, and agreed to give him the belt willingly. However, Hera intervened by spreading rumours among the Amazons that Heracles intended to kidnap their queen. Distrust led to a skirmish, and in the confusion, Heracles killed Hippolyta or forced her to surrender the belt. Some versions say she survived, but the rest of the Amazons ended up hostile. Taking Hippolyta's girdle back to Mycenae proved Heracles' ability to navigate distant lands and warrior cultures, though he again faced the consequences of Hera's interference. In this journey, Heracles ventured to the far west, sometimes identified with the region near the Atlas Mountains or the Iberian Peninsula. Geryon was a 3-bodied giant who owned red cattle, guarded by the 2-headed dog Orthus and a herdsman named Eurytion. Heracles first had to cross the desert, where he grew so hot and angry at the sun that he threatened Helios. Legend says Helios admired his boldness and lent him a golden cup or vessel to sail across the ocean. Reaching Geryon's land, Heracles killed Orthus, Eurytion, and finally Geryon in battle. He then drove the cattle back toward Greece, facing more obstacles along the way, such as the monstrous Ligurians or other local kings. The trek helped define the boundary markers known as the Pillars of Heracles, located at the Strait of Gibraltar in later traditions. These apples, said to grant immortality or at least symbolized as golden fruits, belonged to Hera's orchard. They were guarded by the Hesperides, nymphs of the evening, and a serpent named Ladon. To find the orchard's location, Heracles sought advice from various figures, possibly including the shape-shifting sea god Nereus. Once Heracles located the grove, he employed a famous trick. He convinced Atlas, the titan bearing the sky, to retrieve the apples for him, offering to hold the sky in Atlas's place temporarily. Upon Atlas's return with the apples, he tried to leave Heracles holding the burden forever. But Heracles feigned agreement, only asking Atlas to take the sky back briefly so he could adjust his cloak. Atlas complied, and Heracles seized the chance to walk off with the apples. Through a mix of brawn and cunning, Heracles completed what was supposed to be an impossible theft. Labour 12. The capture of Cerberus. The final and most daunting labour was to seize Cerberus, the 3-headed guard dog of the underworld. Heracles ventured into Hades' realm, sometimes guided by Hermes or Athena, where he met Hades and Persephone. They allowed him to take Cerberus if he could do so without using weapons, relying only on physical strength. Heracles wrestled Cerberus, enduring the bites of its heads and the strike of its serpent tail, until the beast submitted. Dragging Cerberus to Mycenae, he showed Eurystheus his success. Horrified, the king begged Heracles to return the creature below at once. This feat sealed Heracles' status as a hero who overcame even death's domain. After returning Cerberus, Heracles was freed from his atonement. Some accounts mention side adventures in the underworld, like freeing Theseus from a cursed seat, further underscoring his capacity to traverse realms no other mortal dared enter. The death of Heracles. Following his 12 labours, Heracles continued to have adventures, aiding gods and mortals. He fought in wars, rescued princesses, and joined expeditions. One of his final travails involved the centaur Nessus, who tricked Heracles' wife, Deianira, into believing his blood could ensure Heracles' faithfulness. When Heracles later fell for another woman, Deianira smeared what she thought was a love charm on his cloak. Instead, the centaur's blood had mixed with hydra venom from one of Heracles' own arrows. The venom burned Heracles' flesh. In agony, he built a funeral pyre on Mount Oeta. As the flames consumed him, Zeus granted him apotheosis. Heracles ascended to Mount Olympus as an immortal. His mortal pains ended, and he reconciled with Hera, who accepted him as a divine son. This duality, mortal trials followed by elevation to godhood, remained a unique hallmark of Heracles' legend. Bellerophon. Although not always placed with Heracles in terms of Greek genealogies, Bellerophon is another hero often mentioned alongside other slayers of monsters. He was born in Corinth. Some sources say he was the son of Poseidon, and became famous for taming the winged horse Pegasus with Athena's help. At one point, King Proetus' wife falsely accused Bellerophon of wrongdoing, and Proetus sent him to Lycia with a message asking King Iobates to kill him. Instead of direct murder, Iobates assigned Bellerophon quests, hoping they would lead to his demise. The most renowned task was defeating the Chimera, a fire-breathing creature described as part lion, part goat, and part serpent. Soaring above on Pegasus, Bellerophon shot arrows at the Chimera, eventually killing it. He also fought warrior tribes like the Amazons and survived ambushes arranged by Iobates. Once his courage became clear, Iobates gave him half the kingdom. Unfortunately, Bellerophon's confidence grew into hubris. In some versions, he attempted to fly Pegasus up to Olympus itself. Angered by his arrogance, the gods caused Pegasus to throw him off. Crippled and disgraced, Bellerophon wandered alone until his death. Like many Greek heroes, his downfall showed how mortal pride could destroy even the most favoured champion if they overstepped the boundaries set by the gods. In these stories of Heracles and Bellerophon, the mixture of divine aid, heroic strength, and a tendency toward rashness defines each man's journey. Whether subduing monstrous beasts or overreaching the limits of human fate, these heroes shaped Greek culture's sense of valour and caution, echoing the broader theme that the line between mortal success and ruin often depended on respect for the gods and self-control. Jason and the Argonauts. Jason's tale centres on his quest for the Golden Fleece. He was the son of Aeson, the rightful king of Iolcus, who lost power to his half-brother Peleus. Raised in secret, Jason returned to Iolcus as a young man, determined to reclaim his father's throne. Peleus, uneasy about any challenge, suggested Jason undertake a dangerous mission: retrieve the fabled Golden Fleece from the distant land of Colchis. He promised to yield the throne if Jason succeeded, secretly expecting him to fail. Gathering a team of Greece's bravest, Jason assembled the Argonauts, named after their ship, the Argo. Among them were notable figures like Heracles, the Dioscuri twins, Castor and Polydeuces, and Orpheus, famed for his music. In some accounts, the party included the helmsman Tiphys, the swift-footed Atalanta, and the seer Idmon. Each hero contributed unique skills, reflecting the cooperative nature of this legendary band. The Argo itself was said to be crafted under Athena's guidance, featuring a magical prow that could speak with the voice of an oak from Zeus's oracle at Dodona. Launching from Iolcus, the Argonauts faced trials at every turn. Early on, they reached the island of Lemnos, inhabited solely by women who had offended Aphrodite and thus driven away or killed their men. The Argonauts spent time there, forging personal ties. Moving on, they helped King Sisyphus repel giants known as the Earthborn. Confusion led to a tragic nighttime battle in which the Argonauts accidentally slew their ally. At other points, Heracles was lost from the expedition, searching for his abducted companion Hylas. Accounts differ on whether Heracles ever rejoined them, but he played no further part in obtaining the fleece. Pressing eastward, Jason's crew confronted the clashing rocks, or Symplegades, massive stones that crashed together at unpredictable intervals. Warned by Phineus, a blind prophet, they tested the passage by sending a dove first. When the dove emerged with just a clipped tail feather, the Argonauts rode swiftly. Athena or Poseidon aided them, ensuring the Argo slipped through with minimal damage. Arriving at Colchis, they met King Aeetes, whose daughter Medea would determine Jason's fate. Aeetes agreed to give up the Golden Fleece if Jason completed impossible tasks. He had to yoke fire-breathing bulls, plough a field with them, and then sow dragon's teeth that sprang up as warriors. Aided by Medea's sorcery, she gave him a salve to protect against the bull's flames, and a plan to make the Earthborn warriors turn on each other. Jason triumphed, yet Aeetes still refused to surrender the fleece. Medea helped him again, lulling the dragon that guarded it and enabling Jason to seize his prize. Betraying her father, Medea fled Colchis with Jason, pursued by Aeetes. Some tales describe a grim diversion. Medea dismembered her young brother Absyrtus, tossing pieces overboard so her father would pause to collect them, giving the Argo time to escape. Guided by oracles and sometimes forced to seek purification for the murder of Medea's kin, the Argonauts wandered strange seas. They might have travelled by the Danube or skirted the North African coast, as versions vary. Eventually, they returned to the Aegean, facing further obstacles and temptations. During their return voyage, the Argonauts encountered the Sirens, creatures whose enchanting song lured sailors to their doom. Orpheus, using his divine music, drowned out the Sirens' calls, protecting the crew. This motif, later echoed in the Odyssey, reinforced how song and wit could counter supernatural threats. Some variants say one Argonaut, perhaps Butes, jumped overboard, entranced by the siren melody, until Aphrodite rescued him. Once Jason arrived in Iolcus with the fleece, he expected Peleus to relinquish the throne. Instead, Peleus refused. Medea then devised a plan. Demonstrating a trick, she cut up an old ram, boiled it in a cauldron with magic herbs, and produced a young lamb. Peleus's daughters, hoping to restore their father's youth, attempted the same procedure on Peleus, but without Medea's secret knowledge. Peleus died in the cauldron, and his daughters were horrified to find they had destroyed him. Though Jason rid himself of Peleus, the act was condemned by many in Iolcus, forcing Jason and Medea to flee. After their exile, Jason and Medea travelled to Corinth, where they lived for a time in relative comfort. However, Jason eventually sought a political marriage with the local king's daughter, betraying Medea. Enraged, Medea took a terrible revenge. She killed Jason's new bride with a poisoned robe and crown, and she also murdered her own children by Jason. Escaping in a chariot provided by her grandfather Helios, she fled Corinth. The story of Jason and Medea, retold famously by the playwright Euripides, is one of tragic passion and betrayal. Medea's arc, from devoted ally to vengeful sorceress, highlights how the Greek gods and heroes navigated volatile loyalties and personal ambition. Theseus was associated above all with Athens, where he reigned as a unifying hero king. Legends describe him as the son of King Aegeus, or in some accounts Poseidon, and Princess Aethra of Troezen. On discovering his royal lineage, he travelled to Athens, defeating a series of local bandits and hazards along the way. Soon after arriving, he volunteered to go to Crete, as part of the tribute demanded by King Minos. The Athenians had to send youths every few years to feed the Minotaur, a monstrous half-bull, half-man hidden in a labyrinth designed by Daedalus. With help from Minos' daughter, Ariadne, who gave him a guiding thread, Theseus slew the Minotaur and led his companions out safely. However, on the return voyage, he neglected to change his ship's black sail to a white one as promised. Believing his son dead, King Aegeus hurled himself into the sea, which was then named the Aegean in his memory. Icarus. Theseus's story intersects briefly with that of Daedalus' son, Icarus. After building the labyrinth, Daedalus fell out of Minos' favour and was locked up in Crete. He fashioned wings from feathers and wax for himself and Icarus to escape. Daedalus warned his son not to fly too close to the sun. Overcome by the thrill of flight, Icarus soared higher, causing the wax to melt. Plummeting into the sea below, he drowned. Daedalus survived, mourning the tragic proof that brilliance cannot always prevent fatal mistakes. Although not a direct part of Theseus's heroics, the Icarus tale shares the labyrinth setting and the theme of human daring that can end in disaster. The Caledonian Boar Hunt. In Aetolia, King Oeneus neglected to honour Artemis in his harvest sacrifices. As punishment, the goddess sent a monstrous boar to ravage the region of Caledon. Seeking relief, Oeneus summoned heroes from across Greece to join in a great hunt. Many famed warriors responded, including Meleager, son of Oeneus, and the heroine Atalanta. The boar was a fierce opponent, tearing through fields and injuring several hunters. Atalanta had been abandoned at birth, raised by a she-bear, or hunters, depending on the version. She became known for her speed, archery and independence, pledging to remain a virgin huntress like Artemis. Some men doubted a woman's place in the Caledonian hunt, but Meleager admired her skill. During the chase, Atalanta struck the first blow, wounding the boar. Meleager finished it off, yet insisted on awarding the boar's hide to Atalanta as a mark of honour. This sparked a dispute, as Meleager's uncles felt insulted. When they tried to seize the prize from Atalanta, Meleager killed them. In turn, his mother, Althea, took vengeance by burning the brand that was tied to Meleager's life. This caused his sudden death, fulfilling a grim prophecy. The Caledonian boar hunt thus led to internal conflict and tragedy, despite the heroic teamwork displayed on the field. Having proven her worth against the boar, Atalanta became famous across Greece. Suitors came to woo her, but she resisted marriage. In some versions, she declared she would only wed a man who could outrun her in a foot race. Those who lost would be put to death. Many challengers failed. Eventually, Hippomenes or Melanion sought the aid of Aphrodite, receiving 3 golden apples. During the race, whenever Atalanta drew close, Hippomenes dropped an apple. Distracted by its beauty, she slowed to pick it up, allowing him to outrun her at the finish. Although Atalanta kept her vow and married him, the couple later offended a deity. Some say they made love in a sacred shrine, and both were transformed into lions as punishment. Variants differ, but the result underscores the boundary between mortal passion and divine spaces. Despite the sad end, Atalanta's speed, prowess and independence made her stand out among Greek heroines, illustrating that female figures could match male heroes in hunting and athletic skill. These stories of Jason's epic voyage, the cunning of Medea, Theseus's defeat of the Minotaur, the inventive but doomed Icarus, and the Caledonian boar hunt enlarge the picture of Greek heroism. Each champion faces monsters or challenges from the gods, relying on friends, lovers, or personal cleverness to succeed. Yet tragedy lurks, whether through betrayal or divine judgment, hinting at the fragile line Greek myths often draw between glory and disaster. Chapter 4: The House of Atreus and the Curse of Tantalus. Long before the Trojan War shaped Greek myth, the House of Atreus carried a legacy of blood and betrayal. Its story began with Tantalus, a wealthy king sometimes linked to the region of Lydia or Phrygia. He possessed the favour of the gods to such an extent that they invited him to dine at their table on Olympus. Yet Tantalus repaid this honour with a shocking act. He sacrificed his own son Pelops, serving him as a meal, to test the gods' all-seeing knowledge. Horrified, the Olympians refused to eat the gruesome dish. Demeter, distraught over the loss of her daughter Persephone, was momentarily distracted and accidentally ate a piece of the boy's shoulder. Realizing what had happened, the gods restored Pelops to life, replacing the missing shoulder with ivory. Furious at Tantalus's crime, they cast him into a special torment in the Underworld. He stood in a pool of water beneath fruit-laden branches, perpetually thirsty and hungry. Whenever he tried to drink, the water receded, and whenever he reached for fruit, the boughs lifted away. From this hideous banquet, a curse emerged that would shadow Tantalus's descendants through multiple generations. Myths do not always clarify the exact form of the curse, but the family's repeated tragedies and scandals were seen as a direct outcome of Tantalus's insolence toward the gods. In some versions, Tantalus's daughter Niobe, who boasted about her children and saw them slain by Apollo and Artemis, added to the family's record of impiety. This consistent pattern, testing or mocking divine authority, brought down harsh consequences not only on Tantalus, but on those who followed him, shaping the cycle of events known as the curse of the House of Atreus. Pelops, Hippodamia, and the chariot race. Resurrected and given a new ivory shoulder, Pelops was the focal point of Tantalus's bloodline. In one of the best-known stories, Pelops journeyed to Elis to seek the hand of Princess Hippodamia, daughter of King Oenomaus. A prophecy warned Oenomaus he would die if his daughter ever wed, so he devised a deadly challenge for her suitors. They had to race him in chariots. If he caught them, they would be killed. Many had tried and failed, their heads impaled at the palace gate. Pelops, determined yet aware of Oenomaus's skill and horses, sought help from Myrtilus, the king's charioteer. He promised Myrtilus a share in the kingdom, or a night with Hippodamia, depending on the version, if he sabotaged Oenomaus's chariot. Myrtilus replaced the bronze linchpins with wax ones. During the race, as Oenomaus drove at full speed, the wheels broke loose, flinging him to his death. Pelops thus won Hippodamia. Yet this victory had a dark side. Betraying Myrtilus, Pelops threw him into the sea to conceal their pact. As Myrtilus fell, he cursed Pelops and his lineage. Different accounts blame Pelops for wanting to preserve Hippodamia from Myrtilus, or to silence him about the sabotage, but the outcome remained the same. Another layer of misdeed attached itself to Tantalus's heirs. Despite his triumph, Pelops could not escape the family shadow. He became a powerful king in the Peloponnese, so named after him. But the seeds of tragedy were sown. His sons, Atreus and Thyestes, would take the curse to new extremes. Rivalry of Atreus and Thyestes. Pelops and Hippodamia had several children, though the two most infamous were Atreus and Thyestes. Growing up in a court where ambition and treachery seemed normal, these brothers jockeyed for power. When Pelops died, conflict erupted over who would inherit the throne of Mycenae, or in some versions a kingdom associated with Argos. A key myth has the brothers competing to possess a golden fleeced ram, a sign of divine favour for kingship. Atreus claimed that whichever brother produced this ram would hold the throne. He believed he owned it, but Thyestes tricked him. Some stories say that Atreus' wife, Europa, secretly gave the ram to Thyestes, who then displayed it, proclaiming himself rightful king. Outraged, Atreus plotted revenge. He regained power by convincing Zeus to cause the sun to move backward, a sign of Atreus' divine right. This or another sign from the gods allowed him to seize the kingdom and banish Thyestes. Yet anger boiled within Atreus, and he planned a hideous banquet to punish his brother. Inviting Thyestes back under the guise of reconciliation, he killed Thyestes' young sons, cooked them, and served them to their father. After Thyestes had unknowingly eaten the meal, Atreus revealed the children's heads and hands on a platter, driving Thyestes into horror and exile. This cannibal feast echoed Tantalus's crime, reinforcing how the curse persisted. Myths added that an oracle told Thyestes he must father a son by his own daughter, Pelopia, to bring down Atreus. The child born of that incest was Aegisthus. Years later, Aegisthus would avenge Thyestes, killing Atreus and reopening the blood-stained cycle. By then, however, Atreus' sons, Agamemnon and Menelaus, had already become central figures in another epic story, that of the Trojan War, the children of Atreus, Agamemnon and Menelaus. In many genealogical accounts, Agamemnon and Menelaus were the heirs of Atreus. Raised in a palace marked by bloodshed, they fled when Thyestes and Aegisthus took over Mycenae. Refuge in Sparta under King Tyndareus allowed them to regroup. Menelaus married Tyndareus' daughter Helen, later known as Helen of Troy, while Agamemnon wedded Helen's half-sister, Clytemnestra. Together, these marriages linked the House of Atreus to the Spartan royal line and eventually shaped the alliances leading to the Trojan War. Agamemnon reclaimed the throne of Mycenae or Argos, depending on the version, His ambition aligned with Menelaus's personal grievance when Helen fled, or was abducted, to Troy with Prince Paris. Agamemnon organized Greek chieftains into a massive expedition, forging a league of city-states that included Ithaca, Pylos, and many others. This made him the commander-in-chief of the Greek forces. The sins of the House of Atreus seemed distant for a moment, overshadowed by the collective call to war. But even on the brink of setting sail, tragedy flared up again. When the Greek fleet gathered at Aulis, contrary winds or calm seas prevented departure. The seer Calchas declared Artemis demanded a sacrifice, Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia. Agamemnon's decision to either trick or summon his daughter to the camp varied in different renditions. Some say he promised her to Achilles in marriage, then sacrificed her upon an altar. Others claim Artemis spared her at the last second, substituting a deer in her place. Regardless, the willingness of Agamemnon to kill his child appalled Clytemnestra. This act planted fresh seeds of vengeance, ensuring that even if the war succeeded, the king's household would not be at peace. Agamemnon and Menelaus would soon direct the Greek forces in the Trojan War, forging alliances that spanned the entire Aegean world. Their actions, driven by both personal motives and the weight of family history, became key threads in that epic conflict. We will see in the next chapter how the House of Atreus, already scarred by curses and betrayals, shaped the direction and outcome of the legendary war at Troy. Through all these tales, the House of Atreus reflects the power of the gods' anger to span multiple generations. Tantalus's initial crime led to an unbroken chain of horrific deeds: infanticide, cannibalism, incest, and betrayal, underscoring how a single act of hubris could unleash endless calamity. Even as the family rose to high royal status, they remained haunted by old sins, confirming the idea that divine retribution might lie dormant for a time, only to erupt at pivotal moments and ensnare each new descendant. The next great crisis for the House of Atreus would be the Trojan War itself, where the family's tragedies would continue, and in some ways shape the fate of all Greece. Chapter 5: The Trojan War. The Trojan War was one of the central events in Greek mythology, bringing together many legendary figures under a single cause. Although the conflict itself lasted a decade, the events leading to it stretched back to family ties, divine quarrels, and earlier heroic deeds. At its heart lay the figure of Helen, her many suitors, and a fateful contest among the goddesses. In this chapter, we look closely at the spark that ignited the conflict, the main powers gathering on both sides, and the crucial role played by Achilles and his fellow champions. Helen was famed throughout Greece for her extraordinary beauty. Various sources identify her as a daughter of Zeus and the Spartan queen Leda. The same union, in some versions, produced Clytemnestra, Helen's sister and later wife of Agamemnon. By the time Helen reached marriageable age, dozens of Greek princes and heroes sought her hand. They arrived from many city-states: Sparta, Mycenae, Pylos, Ithaca, and beyond, each hoping to become allied with Tyndareus, the king who was acting as her guardian or father figure. Fearing that choosing one suitor might provoke the others to retaliate, Tyndareus faced a delicate problem. One account says Odysseus of Ithaca offered a clever solution: make all suitors swear a sacred oath to defend Helen's eventual husband against any attempt to take her away. This oath of Tyndareus bound the suitors in a pact. Whoever Tyndareus finally selected for Helen could expect the loyal support of the others if any threat arose. In exchange, Tyndareus helped Odysseus win the hand of Penelope, a move that would influence later stories significantly. When Tyndareus chose Menelaus, brother of Agamemnon, the other suitors accepted Helen's marriage with minimal complaint. Menelaus thus became the new king of Sparta. For a while the couple lived in relative peace and prosperity. However, the suitor's oath now loomed in the background, waiting for a crisis that would test their loyalty: the judgment of Paris. Although the mortal realm was calm for a time, the gods were busy setting in motion another episode that would tie directly into Helen's fate. It all started with a wedding on Mount Pelion, the marriage of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea nymph. All gods were invited except Eris, the spirit of strife. Angry at her exclusion, Eris tossed a golden apple among the guests, inscribed, "To the fairest." 3 major goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, claimed the apple. Unable to decide who was most deserving, Zeus sent them to a shepherd prince named Paris in Troy, trusting he would be an impartial judge. Paris was actually the son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy, though he was raised away from court due to ominous omens. The 3 goddesses offered bribes to sway his choice. Hera promised royal power over vast lands, Athena promised wisdom and success in battle, and Aphrodite promised the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Eager for romance or smitten by Aphrodite's allure, Paris awarded her the apple. In return, Aphrodite guided Paris to Sparta. There, depending on the version, Helen either fell in love with him under Aphrodite's spell, or was abducted. Some mythographers say Helen was entranced by divine intervention and willingly departed. Others depict Paris as kidnapping her. Regardless, the result was the same. Helen ended up in Troy. When Menelaus discovered his wife gone, he invoked the oath of Tyndareus, calling on all the former suitors to help him retrieve Helen. This act set the entire Greek world on the path to war with Troy, a prosperous city on the coast of Asia Minor. In many myths, the ultimate blame fell not just on Paris, but on the goddesses themselves, whose rivalry seeded a conflict that would claim countless mortal lives. Sparta alone lacked the strength to challenge Troy directly. Under Menelaus's urging, his elder brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and recognized as the most powerful ruler in mainland Greece, summoned leaders from across the Aegean. These included Odysseus from Ithaca, Nestor from Pylos, Diomedes from Argos, the giant warrior Ajax from Salamis, and many others. Some came readily. Others, like Odysseus, needed convincing. One story says Odysseus, wishing to avoid the war, pretended madness by sowing salt in his fields. Palamedes tested him by placing Odysseus's infant son, Telemachus, in front of the plough. Odysseus steered away, revealing his sanity. Forced to join, Odysseus then became one of the key strategists for the Greek side. Despite assembling a large fleet at Aulis, the Greeks faced obstacles. Myths state that Agamemnon offended Artemis by killing a sacred deer or boasting about his hunting prowess. As punishment, the winds died, preventing the ships from sailing. The seer Calchas insisted Artemis demanded a sacrifice, Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia. Out of loyalty to the mission or fear of divine wrath, Agamemnon lured Iphigenia to Aulis under false pretenses, sometimes claiming she was to marry Achilles. In the grim version, he sacrificed her, freeing the winds. Other accounts say Artemis substituted a deer at the last moment, spiriting Iphigenia away to serve as a priestess. Either way, Agamemnon's deed sowed bitterness in his family, foreshadowing future bloodshed. With sails raised at last, the Greek armada crossed the Aegean Sea to lay siege to Troy. The expedition is often associated with the Mycenaean Age in historical interpretation. Archaeologists have linked many leading city-states, like Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns, to large palatial complexes discovered in the late Bronze Age layers. While myths exaggerate details, an entire decade of warfare for instance, they may reflect distant memories of real conflicts in the region during the 12th or 13th century BCE. Achilles. The greatest Greek warrior was Achilles, son of Peleus and Thetis. Homer's Iliad focuses heavily on him, depicting his unparalleled fighting skill, but also his volatile pride. Many myths surround Achilles' early life. One says that to prevent him from going to war, and thus dying young as prophecy foretold, Thetis tried to hide him on the island of Skyros, disguised among the king's daughters. Odysseus discovered him by trick. He laid out jewelry and weapons, then sounded a war horn. Achilles instinctively seized the sword, revealing himself as a warrior. Another popular tale is Thetis dipping Achilles into the river Styx to make him invulnerable. She held him by the heel, leaving that spot mortal. Later tradition widely adopted the idea of the Achilles heel as a metaphor for a fatal weakness. Homer's account does not mention this detail, but it became a staple in post-Homeric myth. Achilles arrived at Troy with his loyal friend, or beloved companion, Patroclus and the Myrmidons, troops from his father's realm in Phthia. Though still young, Achilles stood out as the finest fighter among the Greeks, inspiring fear among Trojan warriors. His wrath, pride, and sense of honor drove much of the war's outcome. During the conflict's early phase, he clashed with Agamemnon over a prize of war, the captive woman Briseis. Angered, Achilles withdrew from battle, letting the Trojans gain the upper hand. Only Patroclus' death at Hector's hands lured Achilles back to the battlefield, ultimately deciding Troy's fate. Trojan allies. Troy itself was a powerful city under King Priam, whose lineage extended across numerous sons and daughters. Among them Paris, also called Alexandros, triggered the war by bringing Helen to Troy. Meanwhile, Hector, Priam's eldest son and Troy's greatest champion, became the main defender of the city's walls. Next to Hector, Aeneas, a cousin from the royal line, also proved to be a valiant warrior, remembered later by Roman writers as an ancestor of Rome. The Trojans were not alone. Many nearby regions sent troops to support them. Ancient epic tradition calls these Trojan allies, or the Trojan allies, enumerating contingents from Thrace, Lycia, and other parts of Anatolia. Some notable allies included Sarpedon, a son of Zeus from Lycia, revered for his bravery. Zeus considered interfering to save him, but the other gods insisted fate must run its course. Eventually, Sarpedon fell in battle to the spear of Patroclus, who wore Achilles' armor at the time. Glaucus, another Lycian hero, sometimes portrayed as a close friend and comrade of Sarpedon. His exchange of armor with Diomedes in the Iliad symbolized xenia, guest friendship, across enemy lines. Rhesus, a Thracian king who arrived with shining white horses. Odysseus and Diomedes famously raided his camp by night, killing Rhesus before he could join the fight. Memnon, an Ethiopian or Eastern king, depending on the source, arrived with a large force to bolster Troy's defences. Memnon was said to be the son of Eos, the Dawn, making him a semi-divine figure. Some epic fragments describe his fierce confrontation with Achilles, who ultimately slew him. Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons, joined Troy in some later epics, showing that Troy's appeal stretched beyond immediate neighbours. She fought bravely until Achilles struck her down. These allies highlighted Troy's extensive connections and the city's broad influence. Many Greek poets used them to stress that the war was not a simple duel between one city and another, but a major regional conflict involving numerous armies. Their presence also introduced new dramas, as each ally brought unique strengths, and often died in memorable clashes with Achilles or other Greek heroes. Throughout these events, gods continued to meddle. Aphrodite guarded Paris, her protégé, while Hera, Athena, and Poseidon sided firmly with the Greeks out of bitterness toward Troy or because of prior quarrels. Apollo offered occasional support to the Trojans, punishing the Greeks with plagues or aiding Hector. This divine involvement gave the conflict a cosmic dimension, where mortal valor sometimes paled beside godly interference. By the war's middle years, both sides had dug in, and the fighting ebbed and flowed around Troy's walls. The city's fortifications resisted direct assault, forcing the Greeks to rely on blockades, raids, and attempts to cut Trojan supply lines. Embassies for peace failed, as the Trojans refused to return Helen and the Greeks demanded unconditional surrender. The stage was set for a drawn-out siege, overshadowed by Achilles' internal strife and the question of whether fate itself would doom Troy. So began the infamous Trojan War, driven by personal oaths, divine contests, and rivalries that spanned both mortal and immortal realms. The Greek coalition mobilized some of its finest warriors, Achilles, Odysseus, Ajax, and many others, while Troy and its allies rallied behind Hector, Paris, and a host of notable regional leaders. Despite the heroes' skill, the war would drag on for 10 long years, with each side suffering profound losses. For the House of Atreus in particular, this fight represented both glory and a grim reminder that old curses remained potent, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Subsequent events, such as the key battles, the quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon, Hector's final stand, the Trojan horse, and Troy's eventual fall, would become cornerstones of Greek myth, immortalized in epic poetry and tragic drama for centuries to come. But the foundations were laid in these early steps: the abduction or seduction of Helen, the oath that bound her suitors, and the fateful decision of Paris to award Aphrodite the golden apple. All these threads converged on the plains before Troy, transforming personal choices into a war that shaped Greek heroic culture forever. The war begins. Although legends and local epics preserved many details about the Trojan War, the poet Homer's Iliad offers the most famous account of events during its 10th and final year. The poem does not start at the war's beginning, but plunges directly into a quarrel between the Greek commander Agamemnon and the mighty warrior Achilles. Earlier successes had led the Greeks to capture various coastal towns around Troy. During one such raid, Agamemnon took a priest's daughter, Chryseis, as a war prize, and Achilles claimed Briseis. When the priest of Apollo demanded his daughter back, and Agamemnon refused, Apollo sent a plague upon the Greek camp. Pressured by his allies, Agamemnon released Chryseis, but in retaliation he seized Briseis from Achilles. Enraged, Achilles withdrew to his tent, vowing not to fight. Without their strongest champion, the Greeks suffered defeat after defeat. Trojan forces led by Hector, Prince of Troy, pushed the Greeks nearly to their ships. In the Iliad, this conflict of pride, Agamemnon's high-handed approach, and Achilles' wrath drives the plot far more than the original matter of Helen's abduction. The gods also take sides. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon favour the Greeks, while Apollo and Aphrodite defend the Trojans. Zeus attempts to remain impartial, yet allows Achilles' temporary absence to unfold, showing how mortal actions can still influence the tide of war. By the time the Iliad begins, the war has dragged on for nearly a decade. Soldiers on both sides have endured hardships, supply issues, and heartbreak. The city of Troy remains fortified behind tall walls. Whenever the Trojans gain confidence, they sally forth, led by Hector or other champions. Greeks respond with raids on Trojan allies, hoping to starve the city into submission. Neither side can fully overpower the other. Homer's poem focuses on just a few weeks within this 10th year, highlighting how Achilles' absence cripples Greek morale. The other Greek fighters, Odysseus, Diomedes, the Ajaxes, continue to hold the line, but Hector's bold advances prompt calls for peace negotiations. Attempts to settle the conflict without further bloodshed fail, often because the Trojans refuse to return Helen, or the Greeks demand unconditional surrender. Midway through the epic, Achilles' close friend Patroclus convinces him to lend his armour so the Greeks might believe Achilles has rejoined the fight. Patroclus leads the Myrmidons in a sudden surge, driving the Trojans back. But he goes too far, challenging Hector himself beneath the city walls. Hector kills Patroclus in single combat, stripping Achilles' borrowed armour. This event is the turning point. Achilles, upon hearing of Patroclus' death, is shattered by grief and fury. He emerges from his self-imposed exile, receives new divine-forged armour from his mother Thetis, and re-enters the battlefield to exact vengeance. Achilles' return is swift and devastating. The Trojan forces, previously emboldened, retreat behind their walls. Hector, despite pleas from his family to stay safe within Troy, feels compelled to face Achilles outside the Scaean gates. In a gripping scene described in Book 22 of the Iliad, Hector first flees, running around the city walls 3 times before the goddess Athena tricks him into halting. Achilles then fights and kills Hector in single combat, driving a spear through his neck. Consumed by rage, Achilles ties Hector's body to his chariot and drags it around the city walls, dishonoring a noble foe. This act horrifies both Trojans and Greeks. Even the gods watch with dismay. Soon after, King Priam of Troy, aided by Hermes, bravely enters the Greek camp at night to beg Achilles for Hector's corpse. Moved by Priam's grief and remembering his own father, Achilles relents, returning Hector's body for proper funeral rites. There the Iliad ends, focusing on the dignity of mourning in the midst of war, rather than showing the final fall of Troy. Later epics and sources fill in what happens next. The Trojan horse. Following Hector's death, the Trojans lose their strongest defender, yet the city's walls remain unbreached. Achilles continues to dominate battles, slaying Trojan allies like the Amazon queen Penthesilea and the Ethiopian king Memnon. However, Achilles eventually meets his own death, struck by an arrow to his heel, guided by Apollo, and shot by Paris. Though sources vary, many cite that Achilles' vulnerable Achilles' heel leads to his downfall. With Achilles gone, the Greeks search for a new strategy to overcome Troy's defences. The cunning Odysseus devises the plan of the Trojan horse. The Greeks pretend to abandon the siege, sailing away from the shore, but leaving behind a massive wooden horse as an offering to Athena. A lone Greek soldier, Sinon, remains behind to explain that the horse is a sacred gift intended to appease the goddess. He insists the Greeks dared not destroy it for fear of her wrath, and that taking the horse inside their walls would bring Troy Athena's favour. Despite warnings from Cassandra, who is cursed to prophesy truth but never be believed, and from the priest Laocoon, beware of Greeks bearing gifts, the Trojans wheel the horse into the city. At night, Greek warriors hidden inside, including Odysseus, emerge, open Troy's gates, and signal the rest of the Greek fleet to return. The city is sacked in a sudden, brutal onslaught. The fall of Troy. With the gates opened, the Greek army pours in. The Trojan defenders are taken by surprise. Many are killed in their sleep. King Priam is slain at the altar of Zeus in his palace by Achilles' son Neoptolemus. The city's men are systematically put to the sword, and the women taken as spoils or enslaved. Legendary queens like Hecuba and princesses like Andromache face grim fates, often allocated to Greek leaders as prizes. Helen's role in Troy's downfall remains controversial. Some accounts say she quietly rejoins Menelaus, who spares her life due to her beauty or lingering affection. The city of Troy burns, bringing an end to a decade-long war. However, the victor's triumph is tainted by their cruelty. Many Greek warriors commit sacrilegious acts, such as Ajax the Lesser, dragging away the prophetess Cassandra from Athena's temple. The gods are angered, and as a result, many returning Greek ships face disasters at sea. Surviving Trojans scatter, with heroes like Aeneas fleeing to found new lands. The Trojan diaspora shapes further myths in places like Italy, the basis of Virgil's Aeneid. Orestes. Back in Greece, the house of Atreus feels the lasting effects of the Trojan War. Agamemnon, leader of the expedition, returns home to Mycenae victorious, but he carries heavy guilt for sacrificing his daughter Iphigenia and for the bloodshed at Troy. His wife, Clytemnestra, has not forgiven him. During his long absence, she took Agamemnon's cousin Aegisthus, son of Thyestes, as her lover. Together, they plot to kill the king. Upon his arrival, Agamemnon enters the palace, only to be murdered, sometimes in a bath, sometimes in a banquet scene, by Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. This act extends the cycle of vengeance and betrayal in the house of Atreus, as prophesied by the family's curse. Orestes, the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, eventually becomes the focal point of revenge. Raised away from Mycenae, he returns to avenge his father's murder. Assisted by his sister Electra, Orestes kills Aegisthus and, in many versions, also kills his own mother. Committing matricide spawns new horrors. The Erinyes, Furies, hound Orestes, driving him toward madness. Only through an appeal to the goddess Athena, who presides over the first trial by jury in Athens, as portrayed in Aeschylus's Eumenides, does Orestes find some release from the curse. Athena persuades the Erinyes to accept Orestes' plea, transforming them into the Eumenides, or kindly ones, patron spirits of justice rather than pure vengeance. In that sense, Orestes' arc closes one cycle of the House of Atreus' tragedy, introducing the idea that mortal law courts, guided by divine wisdom, can supersede unending cycles of blood vengeance. This shift reflects a broader cultural move in ancient Greek thought, from private retribution to more communal systems of justice, echoing the transition from mythic to civic frameworks. Thus, the Trojan War's final chapters connect personal vendettas, political upheaval, and divine punishment. The conflict, sparked by Helen, and the strife of the gods, ends with the utter destruction of a mighty city, and the moral ruin of many Greek victors. Yet it also leads to new journeys, Odysseus' long odyssey home, the founding myths of other regions by Trojan exiles, and the shift in Greek society's views on justice seen in the tale of Orestes. In this way, the Trojan War stands as a major turning point in Greek mythology, bridging the heroic age with evolving themes of retribution, governance, and the inescapable influence of divine will. Chapter 6. The Odyssey. The Odyssey follows Odysseus, king of Ithaca, on his long and perilous journey home after the fall of Troy. While many Greek heroes reached their cities within months or years, Odysseus wandered the seas for a full decade, beset by supernatural threats and divine grudges. Homer's epic poem explores not only Odysseus's cunning and resilience, but also the values and beliefs of ancient Greek culture, hospitality, xenia, the power of the gods, and the trials of mortal endurance. In this chapter, we focus on some of the most iconic encounters: the Cyclops, Aeolus, the Laestrygonians, Circe, the journey to the Underworld, and the Sirens. The Cyclops. Shortly after leaving Troy, Odysseus' ships were blown off course, landing on the coast of the Cyclopes. These beings were giant, one-eyed shepherds who lived in caves and lacked organized laws or farming communities. Seeking supplies, Odysseus and a group of men entered the cavern of the Cyclops Polyphemus, hoping to receive the customary gift of hospitality. Polyphemus instead trapped the intruders behind a massive boulder and began devouring them. Odysseus devised a desperate plan to save the survivors. First, they offered Polyphemus strong wine, making him drowsy. Next, Odysseus and his men heated a wooden stake in the fire and drove it into the giant's single eye while he slept. Blinded and in agony, Polyphemus rolled the stone aside to call for help, but Odysseus's men escaped by clinging to the undersides of the Cyclops sheep. Safely at sea, Odysseus couldn't resist revealing his identity, shouting his name and taunting Polyphemus. In revenge, Polyphemus called upon his father, Poseidon, to curse Odysseus with a long, tormented voyage. This act sealed Odysseus's fate, ensuring that storms and misfortunes would dog him at every turn. Aeolus. Continuing onward, Odysseus reached the floating island of Aeolia, where Aeolus, keeper of the winds, resided. Aeolus welcomed Odysseus, impressed by his tales of Troy. As a gift, Aeolus trapped all unfavourable winds inside a leather bag and fastened it securely, telling Odysseus that if he kept the bag sealed, only gentle breezes would carry his ship safely home. For 9 days, Ithaca's shores drew nearer, yet just before landfall, Odysseus, exhausted, fell asleep. Curious or suspicious, his crew opened the bag, thinking it contained treasure he was withholding. Instantly the raging winds burst out, hurling their ship far from Ithaca. Waking to chaos, Odysseus could only watch in despair as the vessel was swept back across the sea. Iolaus, believing Odysseus had lost favour with the gods, refused to assist them again. The journey resumed under uncertain winds, reinforcing the importance of wise leadership and trust among shipmates. The Laestrygonians. Odysseus next encountered the land of the Laestrygonians, a race of giant cannibals. Initially, the Greeks saw a peaceful-looking harbour ringed by steep cliffs. Odysseus, wary of traps after his experience with Polyphemus, moored his own ship outside the bay and sent scouts ashore. The Laestrygonians showed brutal hostility. One of the scouts was seized and devoured. Raising a cry, the Laestrygonians hurled boulders and spears at the Greek fleet, smashing ships and spearing sailors like fish. In a frenzied retreat, Odysseus cut the mooring ropes of his own ship, narrowly escaping as the giants destroyed every other vessel. This devastating attack left Odysseus with only his single ship and a fraction of his original crew. The episode paralleled his Cyclops ordeal, confirming that not all lands offered kindness to strangers, and that cunning vigilance was often all that stood between survival and annihilation. Circe. Cast adrift once more, Odysseus's reduced company arrived at Aiaia, the island domain of the sorceress Circe. Her palace lay deep in a forest, teeming with docile wolves and lions, once men who had fallen under her spells. When Odysseus sent half his crew to investigate, Circe welcomed them with food and wine, then turned them into swine. Learning of their transformation, Odysseus set out alone to rescue them. Along the way, the god Hermes appeared, offering Odysseus a protective herb called moly. With moly's protection, Circe's magic failed to transform Odysseus. Impressed by his resistance, Circe invited him to share her bed and ultimately restored his men to human form. Gradually, the heroes recovered their strength, feasting and resting on Aiaia for an entire year. Eventually, Odysseus felt the pull of home. When he insisted on leaving, Circe agreed to help, on one condition. Odysseus must descend to the underworld to consult the prophet Tiresias about how to reach Ithaca. This was a turning point in the Odyssey, highlighting the mingling of mortal and divine realms. Circe's transformation spells underscored the thin line between beastly instincts and human reason, while her relationship with Odysseus revealed a more nuanced depiction of a powerful female figure in Greek myth. The Underworld. Following Circe's instructions, Odysseus and his crew set sail to the land of the Cimmerians, where fog and darkness prevailed. There, Odysseus performed a libation, a ritual involving the blood of sacrificed animals, to summon the shades of the dead. The prophet Tiresias emerged, warning Odysseus about the challenges ahead. Specifically, he cautioned against harming the sacred cattle of Helios on Thrinacia, for doing so would bring ruin. Odysseus also encountered the spirit of his mother, Anticleia, who told him how she died from grief over his absence. He met fallen warriors like Agamemnon and Achilles, who lamented the emptiness of the afterlife. Achilles famously declared he would rather be a hired labourer on earth than a king among the dead. This profound moment gave Odysseus insight into the fleeting nature of life and fame, even for the greatest heroes. Overwhelmed, he ended the ritual, fleeing as restless shades threatened to overrun the sacrificial pit. The Sirens. After returning to Aiaia to bury a lost comrade, Elpenor, who had died accidentally and begged Odysseus for proper rites, Odysseus sailed onward. Circe had given him precise warnings about upcoming perils, including the Sirens, creatures whose enchanting song lured sailors to destruction on rocky shores. To safely pass, Odysseus filled his crew's ears with beeswax. Wanting to hear the Sirens' song without succumbing, he ordered the men to bind him tightly to the mast and ignore any commands he gave while under the Sirens' spell. As they rowed by, Odysseus heard the haunting melody promising knowledge of all mortal suffering and Trojan war glories. Spellbound, he thrashed and gestured, begging his men to release him. True to their orders, they pulled the ropes tighter, resisting his pleas. Once the ship cleared the siren's range, the crew removed their wax earplugs and unbound their frantic captain. They had escaped a danger that had doomed countless sailors, again proving that cunning preparation could thwart seemingly irresistible forces. Scylla and Charybdis. After outmaneuvering the sirens, Odysseus and his crew faced the dreaded strait that sheltered two primeval monsters, Scylla and Charybdis. On one side, Scylla lurked among the rocks, a six-headed creature that could snatch sailors from passing ships. On the other side, Charybdis formed a violent whirlpool that swallowed water and spewed it out thrice daily. Circe had warned Odysseus that attempting to fight Scylla would only lose more men. She suggested steering closer to Scylla and sacrificing a few crew members rather than risking total annihilation in Charybdis's maw. As they rowed through, Odysseus tried to rally his men's courage. He did not reveal the full extent of Scylla's menace, hoping to keep their focus on the oars. In a sudden onslaught, Scylla swooped down, seizing 6 sailors, one for each of her heads. Though painful, this allowed the rest to survive and avoid Charybdis. In Homer's narrative, the screams of the captured men echo the tragedy of navigating between two evils. Odysseus pressed on, guilt-ridden, but acknowledging he had chosen the lesser disaster. The cattle of the sun. Now nearing exhaustion, the crew reached the island of Thrinacia, sacred to Helios, the sun god, whose cattle grazed there. Tiresias and Circe had both warned Odysseus to avoid harming these animals, as any harm done to them would provoke Helios's wrath. When storms prevented the ship's departure, Odysseus insisted his men ration their existing supplies. Days of bad weather turned into weeks, and hunger drove them to desperation. While Odysseus prayed alone inland, his men, led by Eurylochus, slaughtered some of the sacred cattle, reasoning they would rather face Helios's anger than die of starvation. Once the winds relented, the Greeks set sail, only to face immediate retribution. Zeus, heeding Helios's demands for vengeance, struck the ship with a thunderbolt, wrecking it at sea. All aboard drowned except for Odysseus. Clinging to broken timbers, he drifted back through the strait of Scylla and Charybdis, narrowly escaping the whirlpool by clambering onto a fig tree that grew upon the cliff. Calypso, cast adrift yet again, Odysseus eventually washed ashore on the island of Ogygia, home of the nymph Calypso. She welcomed him, provided comfort, and fell deeply in love with her castaway visitor. Despite her kindness, Odysseus remained consumed by the longing to return to Ithaca. Calypso, a daughter of Atlas in some accounts, offered him immortality if he stayed with her. He declined, still pining for his wife Penelope. According to Homer, Odysseus spent 7 years on Ogygia, trapped between gratitude and despair. Calypso refused to let him build a boat or depart, believing she could eventually win his heart fully. Only divine intervention broke the stalemate. Athena pleaded with Zeus on Odysseus's behalf, and Zeus sent Hermes to command Calypso to let him go. Reluctantly, she helped him construct a raft and stocked it with provisions. Odysseus embarked once more, braving open waters. The Phaeacians, Poseidon, still nursing a grudge from the Cyclops incident, stirred up yet another storm. Odysseus's raft shattered. He would have drowned if not for the sea goddess Leucothea, who gave him a magical veil to stay afloat. Eventually, he struggled ashore on the island of Scheria, home to the Phaeacians. Discovered by Princess Nausicaa while she did her laundry by the river, Odysseus was guided to the palace of King Alcinous and Queen Arete. The Phaeacians demonstrated an exemplary form of hospitality. They bathed, clothed, and fed the weary stranger before asking his name. During feasts and games, Odysseus recounted his misadventures, moving the court to pity. In response, Alcinous promised him safe passage home, and Phaeacian ships, reputed to sail swiftly, guided by thought rather than awe, carried Odysseus across the seas. Such generosity reflected how the Phaeacians stood out as an ideal of Xenia, underscoring the cultural and divine favour that righteous hosts might receive. The suitors. Odysseus finally awoke on the shores of Ithaca, delivered by the Phaeacian ship as he slept. Unaware he had reached home at last, he initially suspected trickery. After a disguised Athena revealed the truth, Odysseus learned that his palace had been overrun by suitors, local nobles competing for Penelope's hand. Believing Odysseus was long dead, they consumed his estate's food and wine daily, pressuring Penelope to choose a new husband. Aided by Athena, Odysseus concealed his identity, appearing as a ragged beggar. He tested the loyalty of servants and his wife's resolve. Penelope, equally cautious, devised her own trials to stave off the suitors, including weaving and unravelling a funeral shroud to delay a promised choice of new husband. Eventually, she proposed a competition. Whoever could string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through a row of axe heads would win her hand. Each suitor failed to manage even stringing the bow. Odysseus, still disguised, requested a turn. Stringing the bow with ease, he fired an arrow cleanly through the axe rings. At Athena's signal, Odysseus, his loyal son Telemachus, and faithful servants turned their weapons on the suitors, killing them all. Punishing disloyal maids, Odysseus restored order to his household. Only after he proved his identity by secrets known only to them, such as the construction of their marriage bed, did Penelope fully accept he was truly her husband, returned after 20 years of war and wandering. Chapter 7: The Age of Iron. Greek myth posits that the earliest ages featured gods who walked openly among mortals. In the Golden Age, under Kronos, and through the times of the Olympian ascendancy, humans directly experienced divine interventions. Zeus hurled thunderbolts to punish offenders, Apollo answered oracular questions with relative clarity, and Athena guided heroes. Yet as the world entered the Age of Iron, this direct relationship waned. Though gods still ruled from Olympus, they became more remote, rarely appearing in physical form before mortals. Poets and thinkers portrayed the deities as concerned with cosmic balance or great events, rather than daily human affairs. Some myths blame mortal corruption for this distancing. People ceased to honour the gods properly, rituals lost their purity, and arrogance became common. In certain tales, the gods grew weary of human failings, allowing old bonds to wither. Others see cosmic necessity at work. After great wars and the passing of demigods, Zeus intended humans to rely more on their own devices. While temples and oracles continued, Delphi, Dodona, and others, these places now offered more subtle guidance, and signs of divinity often required rigorous interpretation. This withdrawal coincided with an era where the gods still demanded respect, but no longer took the same interest in punishing or rewarding individuals. When they did act, it was through omens or by empowering local heroes, not by physically entering battles as they once had on the fields of Troy. People and city-states had to uphold religion through structured worship, festivals, mysteries and sacrifices. In doing so, they affirmed a belief in divine oversight while acknowledging that the gods had largely retreated behind the veil of mythic memory. Diminishing of the heroic age. The Age of Iron followed the dramatic events of the heroic age, a period shaped by mighty figures like Heracles, Theseus, Perseus, and the warriors at Troy. These demigods and champions, often sired by Zeus or Poseidon, bridged mortal and divine realms, with their adventures concluded, destroying monsters, founding cities and waging the Trojan War. The direct lineage of half-gods thinned out or vanished. Mortal dynasties survived, but pure heroic blood was either diluted or extinguished. Some traditions claim the gods intentionally cleared the world of these powerful offspring, fearing a challenge to divine supremacy. Others describe how wars, from Thebes to Troy, simply claimed most heroes, leaving humbler mortals behind. The Trojan War itself marked a culmination of heroism and tragedy, after which few epic quests remained. Heracles' labours were long finished. and such feats of monstrous combat became rarities. No new Hydra or Nemean lion threatened the settled lands. Without fresh waves of superhuman champions, epic-level conflicts gave way to more ordinary struggles. Local kings based their authority on political power or lineage claims, rather than direct divine parentage. Myths still circulated about old hero tombs. Athenians revered Theseus's remains, Spartans honoured the Dioscuri, but living heroes rarely emerged. In drama and art, stories of the heroic age became revered relics, teaching moral lessons rather than describing everyday possibilities. Human struggles in the new era. In Hesiod's telling, the Age of Iron was a time of toil, moral ambiguity, and diminished faith in immediate divine support. People farmed the land under harsher conditions, needing tools and ingenuity rather than miracles from Demeter. Warfare grew more systematic. No single champion could turn the tide as Achilles or Hector had done. Armies fought pitched battles decided by strategy, discipline, and state resources. Civic life demanded organized laws and assemblies, placing responsibility on human debate. Philosophers arose, questioning or allegorizing the old myths. Some, like the sophists, doubted literal divine interference. Others, like Plato, reinterpreted myths as symbols of eternal truths. While oracles still held prestige, city-states increasingly turned to legislation and alliances for stability. Even piety shifted from heroic shrines to broader communal worship. Festivals at major sanctuaries, initiations like the Eleusinian Mysteries, and cults of healing or harvest. Amid these changes, memory of the heroic age did not vanish. Myths continued as cultural anchors. Temple friezes depicted Heracles or the Amazon fights. Tragedies dramatized Oedipus or Agamemnon. Vase paintings showed Odysseus's Odyssey. The archaic notion of Xenia, hospitality, persisted, partly because the legendary horrors of violating it, like Polyphemus or the Laestrygonians, served as potent reminders. Similarly, stories of curses, such as Tantalus's line, affirmed that wrongdoing could haunt families for generations, even if the gods no longer struck with instant thunderbolts. In a world seemingly governed by mortal effort, the gods nonetheless remained real to most Greeks, receiving prayers, libations, and sacrifices. But the barrier between Olympus and humanity felt wider. Divine favour had to be sought through complex ritual, not by appealing to a father's lightning or a mother's war helmet. This distance shaped a more introspective society, developing the seeds of democracy, philosophy, and systematic approaches to knowledge. Thus, the Age of Iron bound ancient legend to the practical realities recognized by historical Greece. No longer did demigods roam the countryside, and no longer did deities intervene on battlefields at will, yet mythological memory endured, coloring religious practice and moral thought. Heroes lived on in art, poetry, and the genealogies of noble families, while everyday life demanded perseverance against famine, political strife, and a sense that the golden times were gone. In Greek cultural imagination, this was the final age, an era of both diminished wonders and evolving human potential, where the gods watched from a distance as mortals learned to stand on their own.